Hi guys, today is the fourth reading day, and today's story is called No Story by O. Henry. Let's get started. I was doing space work on the beacon, hoping to put on a salary. I wrote whatever the city whispered and roared or chunkled to me on my diligent wanderings about its streets. My income was not regular. One day, Trip came in and lounged on my table. Trip was working in the mechanical department. I think he had something to do with the pictures. He was about 25 and looked 40. Half of, half of his face was covered with short, curly red beard. He was pale and unhealthy, and miserable and fawning. He always borrowed money from all of us, from 25 cents to a dollar. $1 was his limit. Nobody would give him more than a dollar. When he sat on my table, he held one hand with the other. Both hands were shaking whiskey. This day I had received from the cashier 5 silver dollars and advance on a story that the Sunday editor had reluctantly accepted, so I was feeling at peace with the world. Well, Trip, said I, looking at him rather impatiently. How are you? He was looking today more miserable, more cringing and haggard than I had ever seen him. Have you got a dollar? Asked Trip, with his most fawning look and his dog-like eyes. I have, said I, and again I said, I have, more loudly and inhospitably, and besides, I can tell you. And it drew him a great difficulty. I don't want to borrow any, said Trip, and breathed again. I thought you'd like to have some good facts for a nice story, he went on. It will probably cost you $1 or $2 to get the facts. I don't want any money for myself. What's the story? I asked him. I'll tell you, Trip. I'll tell you, said Trip. It's a girl. It's a beauty. She's lived in Long Island 20 years and never saw New York City before. I met her on 34th Street. She stopped me on the street and asked me where she could find George Brown. Asked me where she could find George Brown in New York City. What do you think of that? I talked to her and found that she was going to marry a young farmer named Hiram Dodd next week. But it seems that George Brown is still in her heart. George left Long Island some years ago and came to the city to make his fortune. But he forgot to come back again. And she decided to marry Hiram. Suddenly Ada, her name's Ada Lovery, took the train for New York City. Looking for George, you understand about women. George wasn't there. so she wanted him. Well, I couldn't leave her loose in his town. I suppose she thought the first person inquired of would say. First person she inquired of would say George Brown. Why? Yes, let me see. He's a short man with light blue eyes, isn't he? Oh, yes. You'll find George in 125th Street, next to the grocery. He's a clerk in a store. That's about how innocent and beautiful she is. What could I do? I don't know what money looks like in the morning. And she'd paid her last cent of pocket money for her railroad ticket. I took her to a boarding house on 32nd Street where I used to live. We'll have to pay $1 for her room. That's old Mother Mr. Guinness price per day. I'll show you the house. What words are these, Trip? Said I thought you said you had a story. Every ferry boat that crosses the East River brings or takes away girls from Long Island. Trip's face grew dark. He separated his hands and emphasized his answer with one shaking forefinger. Can you see? He said. What a fine story! What a fine story it would make, all about the romance, and describe the girl and say some words about true love and well, how to do it. You will get $15 out of it anyhow, and it will take you it and it will cost you only about $4. You'll make a clear profit of 11. How will it cost for me? How will it cost for me $4? I asked suspiciously. $1 to Mr. McGinnis, Trip answered promptly, and $2 to pay the girl's fare back home. And the $4? I inquired, making a rapid mental calculation. $1 to me, said Trip. Whiskey. Do you agree? I smiled enigmatically and continued to write. Don't you see, he said, with calmness, that this girl must be sent home today. Not tonight, not tomorrow, nor tomorrow, but today. I can do anything for her. Don't you see that she must come back home before night? And then I began to feel the sense of duty. I knew that my $3 would be spent on others' lovery, but I swore to myself that Trip would not get his whiskey dollar. In chilly anger, I put on my coat and hat. Trip conducted me to the boarding house. He pulled the bell at the door. Give me one of the dollars, quick, he said. The door opened. Mother McGinnis stood there with white eyes and yellow face. Trip gave her $1 and she led us in. She's in the parlor, said McGinnis. In the dim parlor. A girl sat on the crooked marble table. She was weeping. She was a flawless beauty, crying crying had only made her brilliant eyes brighter. My friend, I shuddered, shuddered. My friend, I shuddered. Mr. Chalmers, said Tripp, will tell you, Miss Lowry, the same that I did. He's a reporter and he can talk better than I can. That's why I brought him with me. He's very clever, and he'll tell you now what's best to do. Why, Miss Lowry, I began. I'm at your service. Of course, but oh, said Miss Lowry, it's the first time I've haven't been New York City, except once I was 5 years old. Except once when I was 5 years old, and I had no idea it was such a big town. And I met Mr. Snip on the street and asked him about a friend of mine. And he brought me here and asked me to wait. I advise you, Miss Laura, said Tripp, to tell Mr. Chalmers all. He is a friend of mine and he will give you the right tip. Certainly, said Miss Ada. There isn't anything to tell except, well, everything's fixed for me to marry Hiram Dodd next Thursday evening. He has got 200 acres of land and one of the best truck farms on the island. But this morning I rode over this station. I told them at home I was going to spend the day with Susie Adams. It was a story, I guess, but I don't care. And I came to New York on the train and I met Mr. Flip on the street and asked him if he knew where I could find G. Now, Miss Lovely, said Tripp loudly, you like this young man, Hiram Dodd, don't you? He's all right and good to you, isn't he? Of course I like him, said Miss Lovely, emphatically. He's all right, and of course he's good to me. So is everybody. Of course, everybody was good to her. She's so beautiful. But went on Miss Lowry last night. But went on Miss Lowry last night. I thought about George and I. She began to cry again. Such a beautiful April storm. I wished I could have comforted her, but I was not George, and I was glad I was not Hiram, and yet I was sorry too. He stopped crying and went on with her story. George Brown and I were sweethearts since he was 8 and I was 5. When he was 19, that was 4 years ago, he left Greenburg and went to the city. He said he was going to be a policeman or a railroad president or something. And then he was coming back for me. But I never heard from him anymore, and I liked him. She was going to cry again, but Tripp said, Mr. Chalmers, tell the lady what to do. I couched. I saw my duty. Tripp was right. The young lady must be sent back to Greenburg that day. She must be convinced, assured, instructed. Ticket, ticket that, and returned without delay. I hated, I hated Hiram and this despised George, but duty must be done. Miss Lovery, said I, and impressively as I could. Life is hard, after all. Those home, those whom we first love, we seldom wed. But life is full of realities, as well as visions and dreams. One cannot live on memories. I'm sure you'll be happy with Mr. Dodd. Oh, he's all right, answered Miss Lowry. Yes, I could get along with him fine. He's promised me to. Oh, he promised me. He's promised me an automobile and a motorboat. But I'm just thinking about George. He doesn't write because something happened to him. On the day he left, he and me got a hammer and a chisel and cut a dime into two pieces. I took one piece and he took the other, and we promised to be true to each other and always keep the pieces till we meet again. I've got mine at home now, in a ring box. I know I was silly to come here looking for him. I never realized what's the bla- what's a big place it is. And then Trip laughed, still trying to earn his whiskey dollar. Oh, the boys from the country forget a lot when they come to this city. I guess George maybe is in love with some other girl, or maybe he has gone to the dogs on account of whiskey. You listen to Mr. You listen to Mr. Chalmers and go back home, and you will be all right. I spoke gently and philosophically with Mr. Lowry, delicately, deli- delicately convincing her of the importance of returning home at once. She said she had left her house tied to a tree near the railroad station, and three of us hurried to the ferry, and there I bought a ticket to Greenbrook for $1.80. Bought me one and a red rose for Miss Lowry. We said goodbye to her. I looked at Trip and almost sneered. He looked more careworn, contemptible, and disreputable than ever. Can't you get a story about? Can't you get a story out of it? He asked huskily. Some sort of a story. Not a line, said I. But we've helped the little lady, and that's all be our only reward. I'm sorry, said Trip almost inaudibly. I'm sorry you just spent your money. Let's try forget about it. Let's try forget it, said I. Trip unbuttoned his coat to take a handkerchief from his pocket, and he did so. I noticed a cheap silver-plated watch chain across his vest. Something was hanging from the chain. It was the half of the silver dime that had been cut in halves with a chisel. What? I said. Look at him keenly. Oh yes, he responded dully. George Brown? No. Tripp. What's the use? I took Tripp's whiskey dollar from my pocket and put it in his hand. Alright, it was kinda difficult today, but yeah, I just did it. See you tomorrow.